Hello and welcome to part 2 of the Generations podcast. I'm Eric and I'm joined again by my amazing dad, Dr. Robert Bergman. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
It's good to be here, Eric, once again.
Thanks. We're going to be starting off on part 2 after we did our introductions in the last lesson. We're just going to be laying the groundwork to what this podcast is all about. We're talking about generations with someone who's born in the 60s, now to me being a millennial / Gen Zer, how we see the Bible. We've grown up in 2 completely different time periods in American culture. And I'm excited to talk about that with you.
Yeah, well, thanks. Yeah, we're I'm a late baby boomer, let's put it that way. Technically, baby boomers go till 1964. Okay,
The greatest generation.
Yeah, the children of the greatest generation. But I was born in '62, so pretty close to the end of the baby boomers. So
nice. So we're gonna have your perspective, because I hate to say it, Dad, but not a lot of people have your perspective anymore.
I'm pretty happy about it.
But we're gonna talk a little bit about, at the beginning, why we think the Bible has foundational truths for our relationships, but not only for that, why we hold it in as a source of truth for us that is relevant still today, even in our modern age. I mean, you heard it all, like the scientific age. People talk about how the Bible is outdated. They talk about how it's a book of mythology, it's a book of outdated sources, it's not relevant to modern day scientific age people. And as a doctor who studied for many, many years in academia and all that stuff, what would you say to people who think the Bible is like completely outdated from someone who's slightly outdated himself?
Hardly. Anyway, I was just thinking about this. One of the big phrases that we hear at this time is, follow the science. Mm-hmm. You got to follow the science. Well, I'll tell you something. If you follow the science, you're going to see that what this book is saying is right. Mm-hmm. And I think if you pay attention to things like biblical archaeology, stuff that's been going on in Israel and around the Mediterranean from the Bible ages, you're going to see that there's a lot of significant, real, good scientific work that's being done with modern technology that is doing nothing but confirming what's in this word.
Amen.
So much of science today has gone political, and that's not science. Science is guys like Sir Isaac Newton, guys like Kepler. We were thinking about. We watched a show the other day about it. These guys that studied orbital mechanics hundreds, thousands of years ago and figured this stuff out. All creationists, and I think creationism is making a strong comeback because people are starting to unveil the politicization of science today.
Yeah, and also how, there's a divine order in things, even from, an engineering level, how math is orderly, how, the atom is orderly, how the world is made up of a creative organizational element, even in the smallest layer, how inside of the smallest cell is sound.
Yeah.
And how in Genesis 1:1, or Genesis chapter 1, it talks about all the way God just spoke and there came creation.
Yeah, I think they call them quarks. Quarks, these quantum physicists talk about this. We had no idea we were going to be talking about this tonight, but you get into the quantum physics. There are many, many quantum physics. Would you call them physicians?
Sure.
Anyway, quantum physics
engineers.
Guys, yeah, who study and they've gone like the smallest part of the atom, the quarks, is sound.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? And God spoke and it was created. Anyway.
Well, we can go off on a quantum physics rabbit trail some other time, but as far as this podcast, how does the Bible relate to relationships? That's kind of what I want to talk about in this podcast series, because relationships are always so potent, so relevant, so important in our day and age. And honestly, there's been like a massive amounts of people feeling isolated, especially through COVID that happened a few years ago, but also just in our individual lives, how we'd much prefer to open up our cell phone, be alone, and interact in a social way when you're not really being social at all. And in my generation, like, that's socialness, but it's really just loneliness. What is your perspective from growing up in a much different time period in the 60s? What is missing, and what do you feel like is a detriment to this age where everything is so scientific and technological?
Wow. My great-grandmother, she lived to be 105. She was born in 1889 and died in 1994, 95.
So she didn't see any technological advancements at all.
She saw it all. From courting on horseback, you know, through the invention of a car, through
the computer,
the television, going to the moon. Both world wars.
Did we actually go to the moon?
So
No.
anyway,
We're not going to go there.
But we were, Kim and I were home for her 98th birthday, and we were in the military at the time. We were stationed overseas, and we were home for her 98th birthday, and we asked her, "What's the most significant thing that you've seen in your lifetime? What is it that changed the world more than anything else?" And she said it was the television. I mean, we had been to the moon, we'd flown, you know. I mean, she was born before, you know, the Wright brothers, you know, flew their airplane in Kitty Hawk.
But instead she says an electric box.
Yeah, a box. Because she said the television brought the world into your home. Okay, and I'm not sure she was all that happy about it, but I think today we see everything brought into your hand in front of your face, and it, since it's the world, it's mostly bad. Since it's the world being brought in, there's a lot of good applications for Christianity in that kind of communication system, you know, a cell phone. But I think for the most part, it's been bad because it is the world. So, you know, we get back to this. You know, take courage. I've overcome the world. You know, that's what Jesus says, and he does.
Right.
But he's been doing that for a long time. He did it. He did it 2,000 years ago, and it's still working. So,
and that brings me to the passage that says, "And you will know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." That's why we believe, like, the word, even though it is old, it's very old, it doesn't matter. Something that is old could be just as right,
oh boy,
as it is that something brand new and could be completely
And
wrong.
let me tell you something, young fella, since I'm so old, I have discovered there's more truth in here the older I get. You know, we happen to be reading through Proverbs right now, and I'm just reading stuff. It's like, that's today. That's happening today. That's happening. That's me. I know that's true. You know, there's so much truth that I think even as you get older, you realize more and more and more how much truth is in there.
Wow.
Is in the Word.
That's really good.
So,
And well, I kind of want to shift this now to application in relationships from this.
okay.
You know, you've been married for many, many years.
Almost 40. It'll be 40 this year.
Congratulations.
It's awesome.
What is something that you see in the lenses of the modern day relationships that you feel is one of the main things, the way we look at the word, like a lens that's kind of broken in how we read the word? What is something that we struggle with in this culture, in this day and age, maybe even in the 21st century, something specifically in a newer,
Right.
from your perspective?
Well, I'll start with saying that it's not new. what I think. We've been having this conversation. We've been thinking about it, and even what was the issue in the Old Testament? The issue was idolatry. You know, we worshipped something else. The Israelites, you know, all the ites all around them, they worshipped something other than the one and only God. Same is true today. But we were just talking about the scientific lenses that we see now. And America, I think, one of the, probably the most significant lens that we read, that we have to look through into our, as we read the Bible, that we struggle with, is a worship of independence. And, you know, America, we're all about our independence. Well, it's not so much that it's independence. I mean, we broke away from Great Britain and we became independent, but it's more like we became
Independent from God.
Yeah. We were, you know, this nation was started by being dependent on God. We wanted religious freedom of getting out from under some things, you know, especially the Pilgrims when they came across. But they wanted to be dependent on God. Okay, now we've kind of taken what I would call liberty, which is what we fought about, you know, in the Revolutionary War. And we've kind of transitioned to worshiping ourselves. So today we struggle with this independence, where it really impacts what we read in the Bible. So it's like a lot of things in the Bible have become optional. You know, we were watching a Dennis Prager video the other day about you know, the generation before mine. You know, people did things because you should do them.
Now we're all about want.
Now we're all about I'm only going to do the things I want to do, and
Yeah.
I've got to be motivated by something to do that. When it used to be, and that's extrinsic motivation instead of intrinsic motivation, which is, hey, I motivate myself to do this because I know I should be doing it.
And I like the example that Dennis Prager used about how he would call his mom.
Right.
And his mom would pick up the phone and just start
Yelling at him, yeah.
ranting on everything he's doing wrong, you know, and the modern day person would go, okay, I'm going to go to a therapist.
Or I'm going to create a boundary.
And they're going to tell you in this
Right.
scientific age, you should create a boundary. You
Yeah.
shouldn't do that anymore, because not only do you not want to, they're toxic. They are abusive person. You shouldn't be around them. And I think that drives us to be in isolation once again.
And in that particular case, I'm sorry to interrupt, but in that particular case, what does the Bible say about how you treat your mother? It says, honor your mother and father. It doesn't say when they're treating you right. There's no conditions to that. That's unconditional. So it's one of those shoulds. You should do it,
whether you feel like it or
whether
not.
you feel like it or not, and whether the outcome is favorable or not.
Right. And God gives you a blessing for that.
Right.
He says that after. He says, honor your father and mother.
Because sometimes it's hard. I think your mom said that in that conversation. It's you know, then you know, you will live a long life. Okay, and it's really the only one of those commandments with a promise.
Yeah.
If you do it. So anyway.
And I think another lens that I was talking to you about earlier as we were preparing for this episode is that when the Bible was written, it was written in a completely different culture. One of the things that was completely different, at least for most people in the USA, is they live in an agrarian culture. And if you're not familiar with what agrarian culture is, it's farmers, people who lived off the land.
Right.
And not only that, they lived in a communal culture. The Middle Eastern was more of a poor area, like give or take. The Nazarene people were poor, generally speaking. You know, Jesus was born in a manger inside a cave. You know, these people were not exactly Romans. They weren't the elite of the elite in Israel. They had to have people in the family provide a living of working together in a town, in a village, and that's how they survived taxation from Rome.
Right.
That's how they survived, you know, all the conquering from other nations over the many, many thousands, hundreds of years that Israel has faced that.
Yeah, but I wouldn't go so far as to say that everybody was poor, because, you know, when you think about it, it's just that was the time. You know, it was
Right.
it was agrarian. People lived off the land. But you look at the sons of Zebedee, James and John, and you look at Peter, they had a successful fishing business. They were business owners. You know, they weren't probably doing that badly. I mean, there's probably times when the fish weren't there. And, you know, maybe they skipped a couple meals. But Jesus certainly wasn't poor. I mean, but that's those kings, when they came, they gave him some serious cash. You know, with the gold and the frankincense and the myrrh. So I wouldn't call them poor. I'd say agrarian is exactly right, because people don't understand that, you know, all that food in your grocery store, it's got to come from somewhere.
I guess the better way to say it is subsisting. You know,
Yeah.
they lived off the land. They would go from food to food. They would have to get
Right.
it themselves. There was no supermarkets. I know.
Or refrigerators.
Imagine living without, you know, your local grocery store.
Or your fridge.
Or your fridge.
Right.
Or your kitchen.
Yeah.
You know, they had to get everything they ate.
So
So
they spend most of their day doing that.
Exactly. And then all those people who, by the way, had a business, they looked at Jesus and they said, oh, I'm just going to follow you and I'm going to leave it all.
Pretty amazing.
Pretty amazing. And they could have said, oh, but how am I going to eat? This is my business. I'm going to just give it all. They just followed Jesus.
Yeah.
And that's the difference between should and want. They had all their wants. They were probably like, oh, I want to continue doing my fishing business. Or, you know, Matthew was a tax collector. I want to keep collecting taxes. And he actually probably wasn't a poor person either.
Right.
But he just left it just to follow him because they felt like they should do it, that he was the Messiah.
That's a good point. Yeah, that whole should. But now we've gotten into I think we read the word sometimes and we think a lot of it is optional, you know. You know, we divorce when Jesus tells us God hates divorce. Well, guess what? You shouldn't divorce if God hates it.
And we pretty much divorce any relationship that doesn't please us anymore.
That's true. We can cut it off, and we can invent our own relationships, you know, through our little devices.
And at the end of the day, I think what I want to talk about in this series is how to bring God, not just God, but like how to bring back society, how to understand the relationships through the lens of the Word. Because our lens is, how does this gratify me?
Mm-hmm.
How does this help me? And I think I want to have your perspective and future guests on the episode, my mom on here, talking about how that is truly not the relationship dynamic that we should have anymore, that we should really treat this as not just a historical book, but a guide.
Right.
A guide to have deep, wholesome, healthy relationships again, that I think a lot of our culture needs again, because I think we are just so selfish. Like you said, the independence. You know, we took independence not only from oppressive people like, you know, the Pilgrims, but we took our liberty from God as well. We took our liberty from religion, period, and from other people, of serving, you know, helping others, marriages that aren't just about me and our feelings.
Well, you get into, and we'll get into this later, but you know, when you talk about marriages, you know,
which I'm going to be asking you about because I'm not married.
There you go. So yeah, I think, you know, when I really think about it, it's that independent. I'll call it an independent spirit that there's across the nation. It's cultural for us. I mean, we have had amazing freedoms.
Yes.
You know, in our lives, we've been blessed by being in a nation that was founded on principle, on Judeo-Christian principles, and yet, you know, generally the world takes over, and we start, you know, going through that cycle where we just you know want to serve ourselves.
Right. Exactly. And we're not trying to dog on the American culture at all. I mean,
well, yeah, I am.
The reason, I mean, Dad's going to be dogging on it. I'm going to be.
From a Christian perspective, we got a dog on it.
But the reason why we have this ability to be independent, why we don't need to have anyone else help us, is because we are a first world successful nation that does have a foundational root in Judeo-Christian values.
We're incredibly wealthy. Yep.
And, we have churches all around the United States. We have the Bible Belt, we're from the South now. But we have a lot of blessings, but I think we just need to be reminded about our foundations again, our basics. I think generations is why I wanted to name this podcast that. It's because, the narrow road is the theme of the whole podcast, but we need to be reminded how to bring God back into our society. That's, people think it's so mundane that they don't even think about any day. Oh, I'll just, have, a prenuptial agreement, or I'm just going to be on my own, and I'm just going to do this. I'm going to be in rebellion from my parents. I'm just going to leave my household. It doesn't matter. My relationship with my mom, I don't need to call her. She's annoying. All these concepts, we shouldn't see it as just, I don't need to follow this. It's not important to me. It will greatly bless you and your life. And I'm interested to hear your perspectives, Dad.
Well, you're going to get
them. I know. My dad is going to tell me his perspective, whether I like it or not.
Well, you're asking. So
I am asking. I want to hear it. My dad is full of wisdom. So thank you for joining us on part 2 of this podcast, and I'm excited to get into it with you.
Oh, thanks. I really enjoyed the conversation, and looking forward to the next one.
Thank you.
All right.
Well, see you then. Bye.
All right, bye.